Well, I'm absolutely delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast today is Paul Weller. And Paul is an ex-professional footballer who spent most of his career, I think over 12 years at Turf Moor playing for Burnley Football Club. And he's recently brought a book out, which is entitled Not Such a Bad Life, Burnley, Gazza, Wrighty, Waddle and Me. I think that's right. And we'll be asking Paul a little bit about that in a minute. Paul, it's brilliant to welcome to the Godcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah, not you. You okay?
Yeah, I'm all right, thanks. Yeah. So I think I know the answer to this, but you're still living around these parts, is that right? Still in East Lancashire?
Yeah. I've not moved back down south. I've stayed here. I've got a wife, kids, and a business around here. So yeah, stayed up north. Love it up here.
Did you think you would go back down south after not long after retiring, Paul, or was it never a thought?
I think in my early years, yes, you always thought that I'd end up going back home, spending time with my family, brothers, sisters. But at the age of 25, I met a young lady, and then at 29, got married and had kids. So that was after that. There was no chance. I was up here for life, and I love it up here. When you leave home at 16 and you move a long way away. I basically grew up here, if that makes sense. I had my childhood down there, but I've done my growing up here from 16 onwards, made some really good friends. So, yeah, the North's my home and I love it up here.
Tell us about that, moving away from home at 16, Paul. I spoke to quite a few guys, ex-Burnley and different professional footballers. How did it come about? Were you scouted or did you approach the club? How was it?
Well, basically, throughout my youth football, I was at Brighton in and out a few times. Wasn't really happening for me. And at the age of, throughout my youth, always played for the year above. So when I got to the under 16 stage, I was always playing for the youth team rather than playing for my own age group. And I was always in and around the Worthing's first team. So when I left school at 16, I didn't get the scholarship opportunity at Brighton. So I decided to go to college in September. But at that time, I was also in Worthing's first team at 16 years old. So I suppose up here, that's like on a par with someone like Colne or Clitheroe, one of those that sort of level. And basically for about 8 weeks, I played in their first team. And the manager was a gentleman by the name of John Murray that used to play for Burnley many, many years ago. And he just decided to quit. It got to middle of October. He said, look, I've had enough. There was financial issues going on behind the scenes and senior players weren't getting paid and stuff. I was getting my £15 a week, so I was all right. But he said, I'm going to take you up to Burnley. He said, I've got links up there with Frank Casper and that. So I came up for a week's trial, played one game against Bury on a Saturday morning at Gawthorpe. I had a really good game, fortunately, and it went from there.
Yeah. How did your mum and dad feel about you coming? Because it's quite a way, isn't it? Burnley to Brighton. That's not around the corner by any means.
Yeah, I think they were a bit split, really. I think Dad was really happy that I was off doing what I loved and what he loved as well, and giving myself the opportunity to go and forge a career in football. Mum, on the other hand, was a little bit like, my little boy shouldn't be going that far, and how often am I going to see him? And it's always been difficult for Mum, and it was difficult for me. I must admit, early days, for quite a few times, I was on the phone in tears to Mum and homesick. And as an apprentice, you get the opportunity to go home 6 times a year. So after the game on the Saturday for the youth team, you're allowed to go home until the Wednesday night, and you're only allowed to do that 6 times a year. Well, I think I went home something like 4 times before Christmas,
Right.
And I'd only signed in November. So in the end, the youth team manager had to say to me, Mum and Dad, look, we need to keep him up here for a while, and he needs to, grow a pair and man up a little bit.
It's quite interesting because I was talking. I'm sure you know Chris Casper. He only went to Manchester and he didn't like staying over. He got to come back and see his mum. So, it's quite tough for young guys, isn't it, making that big shift? Was there any other peers? Did you have people in your peer group who were likewise?
Well, I came up with another lad that lived down south as well. So we were both in the same digs, and we both sort of struggled a little bit, but we looked after each other. I think for me, I was very fortunate in with my digs as well. I moved to just on the fringes of Stoops Estate in Burnley, but it sounds bad, but it wasn't. I stayed with a lady who was a teacher, and she was brilliant. She cooked for us. She looked after us. She made us feel welcome, and it was brilliant. And I was like that for the rest of my couple of years that I was there in Diggs. I stayed with a few families. I stayed with a detective opposite the Oaks Hotel, a really nice house. I lived with an old couple in Padiham. I've moved around a little bit. A nurse called Liz in up at the top end of Ganna Top. So yeah, I had some good digs, some really nice people that looked after us, and they were just fabulous for us.
It's funny talking to you old pros, because I interviewed Trevor Stephen and he said to me, "Is the Cat's Whiskers still there?" And I said, "No, it's bingo now, Trev." He went, "Oh, right, okay." So when you got taken on by Burnley, was this on pro terms? Did they just offer you a pro deal, or was it a scholarship? Or
no, it was a 2-year scholarship at first. So I'd done the November until the end of that season as a first year. Then we'd done the second year, and I then had to do a few months of my third year, if you will. Chris Brass, John Mullen, those sort of players got offered first year contracts. I still had to see out the remaining few months of my scholarship. And then Jimmy Mullen offered me a contract to the end of that season as well. So, I had to do the hard graft, had to do the sweeping of the stands, underneath the Bob Law cricket stand, but sweep those individual steps of the long side and the Beale was a painful one. But it was good times. Apprenticeship days were brilliant, cleaning boots, sweeping stuff. I was in charge of the medical room with Jimmy Holland back in the days, having to make sure the medical room was spick and span. I had to look after Jimmy Mullen's bottle of whiskey and his glasses. That was the funniest one. My mum and dad still can't get over that one. But yeah, it's a away trip. I had to get the bucket of ice with his bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses in there, one for him, one for the chairman. Make sure that they were all there. If I failed to do that, it probably would have lost my job.
Really?
Yeah.
So which coaches were looking after you then? Would it have been Harry Wilson, Terry Passley? Was that a bit later?
Yeah. Well, it was Harry, the one that sort of gave me my apprenticeship. So he was my first year. But then he moved up to become the reserve team coach. So Terry Pashley then came in as my second year coach. So I got 2 different ones there. But yeah, they were both fantastic, both very different in the way they coached and how they approached the game, but both got the best out of me. And I thoroughly enjoyed my time under those 2. Had a little bit again when Harry was still the reserve coach. So I had a couple of years under him then as well. But yeah, they were probably the most important coaches probably in my career, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. I only hear good things about those 2 guys. I used to be a ref and I used to do trials matches down there, so I knew the guys a little bit. Just tell us about, as you're coming to the end of your scholarship, Paul. Were you confident you were going to get a pro deal? Was that kind of clearly in the offing, or were you quite nervous about that?
I think I was confident that I'd get one because I'd seen John Mullen, Chris Brass, and other players get contracts. They were all given 3-year contracts, so the belief was there in the youth at the time. I'll be honest with you, the bit that I was stunned was that when I got my offer of contract in November, I only got it till the end of the season, literally an 8-month contract. And Jimmy Mullen was really harsh with me. I only ever got a 1-year contract each time, whereas the others got 3 years. Now, I was the sort of player that was very small, didn't mature as quickly as the others, so they had to be patient with me as a football club. I didn't really become a man until many, many years later, if you will, physically ready to play football. So it was hard. I lost you then. It was hard, but at the same time, it was really good for me to keep me on my toes. But that was just the battles that I used to have with Jimmy Mullen, because he was a strange character. I don't know if you ever got to meet him.
I never met him, no.
Yeah, well, if he wasn't drunk, then you done well to have a normal conversation with him. It was a bit of a. I didn't like him because of the way he was and the way he was with younger players. He was one of these gentlemen that would shout everything, rather than just saying, "Yes, Paul," or "I think you should do this." It was always at the top of his voice. And like, for example, we used to have to go home for Christmas and the youth team coach couldn't send us. We'd have to go and ask the first team manager. Don't know why, but you'd knock on his door and it wouldn't be, "What, come on in, have a nice Christmas." It was shouting at you, "You want to go home? Go on then." Off sort of thing. It was, and I just didn't like school. As a 17-year-old, 18-year-old, I just thought he's not for me. But that was just the journey that me and him had, the battles we had over contracts, because we had a lot of battles. I'm quite a stubborn person. I didn't think he'd done right by me for quite a while. There was, I don't know if you've had a chance to read the book, but it mentions it in there. The battles I had over 20 quids and 50 quids and stuff like that. I know they're on fortunes, these players now. But I think it was my 3rd year professional contract where they offered me £200 a week and I wanted 250. I knew what the others were on. I set my bar at that, and I was stubborn and I wanted to, stick with it. And it took until November when eventually they said, yes, you can have your 250. And I got my £50 backdated as well to the start of the season. I eventually won my war with Jimmy Mullen. I was stood there quite proud that I'd managed to get my contract, get the money that I wanted, and start my career as a first teamer.
Did you ever meet Jimmy Mullen after he left? Have your paths ever crossed since?
No, never seen him.
Paul,
No,
I asked Jamie Ireland about Jimmy Mullen because I've been a Burnley fan most of my life, and then I wonder whether it would be considered, his time would be considered a success or not. And I think, although there was a relegation in there, wasn't? I think Jamie felt it probably was, because there was a promotion as well. If you take him out of your personal relationship, what do you make of his time there?
Oh, it's a success. He took over in the 4th division, went on an unbelievable run with those players, got promotion. Yes, we then got to beat at the playoff final, won that, Stockport, up we go. Yes, there was a relegation in there, but he took the club from the end of the day, 4th division, upper level. So he goes down as a hero for the fans and what he'd done for the club, brilliant. But what they don't see is behind the scenes that he was, naming 12 players before a game, falling asleep on the toilet, drunk. For me, it was very unprofessional, but that was him. His name between the players was Mad Dog. That's what he was called. Jimmy Mad Dog Burnley. He called himself Jimmy Burnley when he was trying to get back in the hotel at Wembley because he couldn't get his name properly right with the security guards. He was just Jimmy. He was just a nutcase. And I had to experience it as a young lad. My second year apprenticeship, everybody gets to clean boots. As a second year, I had to clean staff's boots. I had the worst job. And he was so superstitious. He had these boots that had holes in them. His toes were coming out. It was just a nightmare to deal with if they weren't spot on. And I just had to experience him firsthand on many levels. And he was for me, he was hard work and not a nice man. But like I say, as a football manager and what he's done for the club, he's up there.
And contrasting that, you played under Inchy, did you? You played under Adrian Heath.
Well, yeah, that was probably one of my favourite managers. And when I say a favourite manager, I love Stan and what he's done for me. But on a personal relationship, Inchy was by far the best. The reason we got on so well was when he was a player as well at Burnley, before he became the manager. I was a young lad coming through, and he was always in my ear, always giving me advice, always telling me what to do, where to go. It was brilliant for me. And even when he went off to, where did he go? Sheffield United. He went off to do his career. I can't remember where he went. He went off somewhere. He was still keeping in contact with me. And when I had those issues before my 3rd year professional contract, I had issues financial wise. And he said, look, you're better than this. Let's get you somewhere else. And he took me to Stoke. He was still doing his playing career, but he took me down to Stoke with Lou Macari. I got to meet Big Vince Overson. And basically, I'd done pre-season down there with them because of Adrian Heath. He said, let's annoy Jimmy Mullen. Let's pretend you're going to be leaving and let's play hardball a little bit. And I went and done pre-season down there because of Inchy, because he just had my best for me really in his heart. So when he then came back as a manager, I was just over the moon. I just thought, this is it. This is the ideal, perfect candidate for me. He thinks the world of me. He's going to get me in the right positions and hopefully progress my career.
And what kind of manager was he? Was he kind of an arm around the shoulder kind of guy? It sounds like he had quite a bit of empathy about him.
Depends who you ask.
Oh, right. Okay.
I think the problem Inchy had was that because he'd been in a dressing room not so long ago, he was still trying to be everyone's mate. And I think that's really hard when you do that transition from that to being a manager, because you still want to be people's friend, but at the same time, you've got to show a bit of discipline and you've got to show them where to go and what to do. And I think that transition was a little bit difficult for him, especially with some of the senior players. Some of the senior players didn't quite respect him like they should have done. And I thought it was very, very hard for him and the senior players as well. So I thought he'd done well in his first year. Second year would have been really, really interesting if he'd have stayed.
Yeah. Paul, I want to ask you about some of those players that you mentioned in your book, but a player I want to ask you about is Paul Stewart. Did you play with Paul Stewart when he came on loan to Burnley? I can't quite remember.
Yeah, I didn't play in the first team with him, but I got to train with him, and I was actually around him for quite a bit. I think as a young lad, what I'd just done, I don't think it's in the book, but in training one day, I got a ball in the eye, literally right in the eye. If it had gone anywhere else, it would have hit the bone around the eye, but it went right in the eye. And my eye filled up with blood. And I had to have 6 weeks off for the blood to basically come out and drain out of my eye. So I spent a little bit of time in the treatment room, and he was in there, and I got to know him, and he was a really, really nice lad. We were going backwards and forwards from Turf to Gawthorpe quite a bit, and he was a really, really good guy. I thought he was a great player because obviously I'm a Tottenham fan. He'd been a Tottenham player as well. So, you know, I was sat there thinking, this is amazing.
Yeah.
He was, I don't think Burnley saw the best of him, you know, because he was an unbelievable talent. But
I've got him coming on the God. I've done the interview, and it's quite a harrowing story actually, and his honesty about saying the Burnley fans wanted to lynch him by the time he left, and he talks about some of his demons. But I mean, you've had problems as well. I mean, you've not had those kind of mental demons. Well, not that I'm aware of, but you've had this ongoing health issue, Paul. Just tell us a little bit about that and how it kind of. Did you have it from a really young age, or did it come as you got a bit older?
No, the health issues is just basically down to my bowels. It started under the Chris Waddle era. It was New Year's Eve. We were in a hotel, and I was rooming as usual with Andy Cook, and I just went to the toilet and just looked down, and there's blood. And I showed Andy Cook, and he said, "Oh, that's not good." He said, "You need to show the doctor," and I did, because obviously Doc McDevitt was there, that used to travel with us. And I just said, "Doc, this isn't right." And he said, "No, we'll get it looked at." And literally the day after the game, I was up at the hospital at Burnley General, and they were just obviously looking, and they just said, "Yeah, you've got some issues down there. It could be inflammation of the bowel, it could be anything early stages." And as the season went on, from Christmas to the end of the Chris Waddle season, I just got worse. I just bled more, and bled more, and so on. It got to the point where at the end of the season, we'd stayed up that final game, that I couldn't drive from Turf Moor to Great Harwood, where I lived, without having to stop and go to the toilet and bleed, basically. So yeah, I was in a bad way at the start, losing so much blood. I was having blood transfusions. And basically it was diagnosed as ulcerative colitis. I just had loads of ulcers in my large bowel, and it was just an issue. What is it? Stress? I don't know. No one really knows what the triggers are, but I just keep saying, I'd only just bought my first house. I was out of contract in that summer. We're bottom of the league. What's the future holding? Am I a nervous person inside? You just don't know. You don't know. But obviously it affected me quite badly. So yeah, that was the start of it, really. And that's when Waddle went, Stan came. I was having Harry Redknapp on the phone, wanting me to go to West Ham. Stan got the job. He wants me to stay. It was a nightmare, and I'm still bleeding. So yeah, it was a tricky few months to try and maneuver through that lot. And then obviously ended up with 3 operations and the removal of my large bowel. Oh.
You missed quite a lot of football, didn't you? As I remember, you missed quite a fair chunk of one particular season. Is that right, Ma?
Yeah, it was Stan's first season.
Yeah.
It was a case of I tried to play the first few games of the season. I was just not at the races. I'd started bleeding again. So Stan just pulled me aside on the coach on the way home and just said, "I'm going to write you off as a cruciate ligament injury. Get yourself to hospital, go and do what you've got to do to get yourself right." And I basically sat in hospital for weeks on end, trying various different drugs, cancer drugs, you name it. I was on so many different drugs throughout the rest of August, September, October, November. And it got to a point where the surgeon came and met me and sat down with me and just said, "Look, what do you want to do? We can keep trying drugs, but we could be doing this for years and years, because what works for one person may not work for another." So in the end, in December, I decided to have my bowel removed. Had another operation in February, and third operation in April. So I was eventually cured and ready for next season, but I was just way off the pace. I was way off it. I'd lost so much muscle weight that I'd had. I didn't have legs like Steve Davis anyway, but what I did have, I'd lost, and I just struggled for many, many months just to get that strength back into me. And I thought I was ready, but Stan said, "You're not." And we had lots of battles throughout that second season, but eventually I came good on the third one.
Were you really fearful for your career going through that period? Was that a really worrying time for you?
Again, I'd never really thought about it. I'd had the conversations with many of the nurses and the surgeon about what would happen if it goes wrong. If the operations didn't work, I have a colostomy bag for the rest of my life. because I had to have a temporary colostomy bag for many, many months. So to have one for the rest of your life, how can you play football with one? Technology was changing. You could still get away with it. And I'm like, I wasn't quite sure, but it never really went through my mind that the surgeon wasn't going to do what he promised that he was going to do. You know, Mr. Sandilands was brilliant for me. He'd come and check up on me on Sunday. He'd come in on his motorbike and make sure I was okay and looked after me. And he was so good. And thankfully the operations worked, but I wasn't really fearful for it. I was quite confident in everybody around me. I thought Burnley General Hospital, the nurses, everybody there were just so good for me.
Do you ever contemplate what impact it had on your career in kind of an upward trajectory? Do you think you might have got a West Ham? You know, I mean, I would never disrespect the club I love, but you know, Burnley were not Premier League at that point. Do you think you may have got an opportunity to go to the next level?
Yeah, I think something. Well, when you're younger, you believe that you can go as high as you possibly can. I had Adrian Heath telling me that I should always go. I should have played in the Premier League, and Chris Waddle eventually, after a few months of him being there, said that I should be playing a lot higher. But it just wasn't meant to be. It wasn't meant to be. I was thankful that I managed to get back on the pitch. I did have a couple of games at West Ham. I played the 2 games in their first team. It was an amazing experience. And I was still on steroids. I wasn't in a great place. And the timing just wasn't meant to be. It wasn't right. And for me to come back to Burnley, stay here, live here, wife, kids, that was meant to be for me. So I'm not one to dwell on it. I had a great career. I got to play in front of some great fans and live in a great area. So, you know, I'm not bitter by any of it. Everybody gets poorly. You just got to get on with it.
And just briefly on Chris Waddle's time, I mean, when I spoke to Trevor Stephen, he just said Chris Waddle was the best player he'd ever played with. Why do you think it never quite worked out for him as a gaffer? Do you think it was just the times and seasons weren't right for him, or he was just never meant to be a football manager?
I don't know whether that was in his makeup. If you ever get to speak to Chris Waddle, I think he's a bit more confident now when you listen to him on the radio. But back then, he was a very nervous sort of guy. He wasn't one that was really confident to stand up in front of a dressing room and really say what he wanted to say and get his point across. A lot of the sessions that were there at training and a lot of things that were said in the dressing room came from Glenn Roeder. And Waddle wasn't that, for me, wasn't a great manager in that sense. I know managers, or the ones he's had, kept themselves separate and it was all about the coaching. But I just found Waddle a little bit strange at first. He was a very nervous guy in the sense that I went to like a functions. We have to do a lot of those functions where you have to go and open schools or go and see kids and that. Well, there's one particular one that I had to go with him. He said, tonight or tomorrow night, we're going to open the brand new Sidewalk 55 in town. And I was like, oh, that's not a bad one. Let's go and do that. He said, it's you, me and Bernard Manning. I went, oh, this is all right. Well, anyway, a long story short, we've got in the place. He's gone to the bar. We've got this little VIP bar in the corner. And he's gone and sat there. And that was it. He just sat there all night, didn't move. I said, are we not going to go and like mingle? Are we not going to go out there? What are we going to do? No, he just didn't want to. Didn't talk to anybody. Kept himself to himself. Really shy guy. And that was, that's, I think, to be a manager, you've got to be a little bit more out there. You've got to be, you know, not like Stan, not quite out there, but do you know what I mean? You've got to be a little bit more vocal and confident in yourself. But he wasn't. He was a very nervous guy. So just not meant to be for him.
Yeah. And Stan, God bless him. You know, the stories are just never unending, aren't they? I've listened to so many podcasts about Stan, but he was successful. What was the key ingredient about that made Stan successful at Turf? What do you think it was, Paul?
I really, really don't know. I have not a clue. I don't think you can't put the ingredients together and bottle it up. It's just Stan. Stan was a madman, a caring man, a nutter, a lunatic, all the mad words you could think of, but a great man, one that had your back. I keep saying the biggest thing for me is that you have the biggest argument with the man ever. You could be nose to nose with him, and the next day he's forgotten. It's all right, Wells. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, right. We're cracking on today. Yeah, we've got to do this. Got to do that. Yeah. All right, okay. And it's like, but what about yesterday? and he just never held a grudge. He got on with things. When we win 5-0, you get a bollocking. You get a right roasting. Whereas you could lose 5-0 and the silence, you think, what's going to happen now? But you just never knew with him what was going to happen. And he kept you grounded.
Yeah.
But I think what he did with the dressing room at Burnley, he brought, I think everyone knows this, he brought a lot of people in that he knew. So there's a few of the Bury lads that came in. And Stan was a massive person for having the dressing room right. If you've got a dressing room that can sort itself out, he didn't have to do too much. So there was a lot of senior players within that dressing room. That first, well, probably the second and third year that he was there. You look at Gordon Armstrong, Ronnie Jepson, Paul Cook, Lenny John Rose. Then Bawley came in. You're talking about senior players that have been there and done it, not afraid to say anything. And if there was an issue in the dressing room, Stan didn't have to sort it out. The dressing room sorted it out. And I think that was probably his big thing. He brought players in that he could trust. Like, he knew Ian Wright. He knew him from his previous days. It wasn't a gamble for him bringing in a player that's just sort of coming to the end of his career at Celtic. He's bringing in a player that he knew really well, what characters coming into that dressing room. The same with your Mitchell Thomases, bringing Stevie Davis back from Luton. All these sort of things, they've been in his head for years, and he was just good.
Paul, were you around the dressing room that night when he came out to the media? And the only name I can remember off the top of my head was Steve Blatherwick, and he reeled off these 4 or 5 players and said they'll never play for Burnley Football Club again, and they didn't, did they? Were you around the dressing room at that point?
I wasn't. No, I was listening on hospital radio. I was listening to it all, and I couldn't believe what it. Glenn came up to see me afterwards and said, "Crikey, it's just kicked off in there." But it was Mickey Williams, it was Howie, Blatherwick, and was the other one Ford?
Ford.
Yeah, it might have been Fordy. He felt sorry for Williams because Mickey Williams never had it right there, and he said, "Look, there might be a player in there, but you're not going to win over the Burnley fans. You need to go." And the other 3 just weren't really up to scratch. Now, were they up to scratch or not, I don't know. Whether that was a case of proving a point to Waddle, because Waddle brought all them in, and Waddle probably didn't really need to bring them in because Adrian Heath had a pretty good squad anyway. But yeah, that was I'd love to have been in that dressing room. I suppose it would have been a lively one, but most weeks it was quite lively anyway.
And you've touched on some of those players. I mean, these are kind of, you and these guys, David Ayres and Parky and people like that. You were the catalyst to the big shift for Burnley. I think you set us on our way. And who were your buddies in the dressing room then? Can you just recall a few of the characters that were with you on those promotion years?
Well, yeah, the early days of getting into the first team dressing room, my best buddy who I ended up sharing a house with was Andy Cook. Andy Cook and me were great friends, still speak to him every week. He's a top lad. But again, as a young lad, people like Adrian Heath, David Ayres, I used to go and stay at his house. He used to take me at the weekend to go and watch Everton. He's a massive Everton fan. He used to say, "Look, come on, I'm going to get you off that Tottenham rubbish and I'm going to influence, come and watch a decent team." So Ayresy used to look after me. Alan Harper, do you remember him? I know he didn't play that much in the first team, but he was a great lad behind the scenes as well, helping me out, making me feel good. The characters in the dressing room, Ted McMinn. A few years before him, John Deary, those sort of characters were absolutely brilliant in there. Yeah, making my debut at right midfield against Leicester in the Carling Cup or whatever it was back then. Parky behind me. Parky was a character in the dressing room. Such a good lad. So funny, but what a good player as well. Great right back. Goes down in history, him and Ayresy, for what they did for the club as well, scoring important goals. So I was fortunate in the early days. Early days was brilliant as well, because that's what people don't realise. I was there in 1991, and when you're cleaning the boots, like the first year of cleaning boots, I'm cleaning Adrian Randall's boots, Graham Lancashire's boots. You're in the dressing room. You're sat there having a chat with John Pender, the defender. Legends that I know it was only 4th division football, but again, that was the catalyst. That Jimmy Mullen team was them. Roger Eli's, Mick Conroy's, all those sort of players were just superb. They were, and they were so nice guys because they weren't on a fortune. Roger Eli was selling tracksuits out the back of his car to earn some extra money. That's how it was back then, and it was brilliant. It really was. It was just such a great place to be, Gawthorpe.
Yeah, Roger's been on the Godcast, and he is a lovely guy, really genuine geezer. Love chatting to him, and then these kind of you know, in your book, you talk about these kind of superstars, and they were great. They were great while they were there. But you waxing lyrical about the John Pender and all them. They're the real superheroes. But just tell us about, you know, Paul Stewart against Gazza was the best player to ever grace a football field with him. Obviously, I think his knees had gone a bit, had they, when he came to Turf Moor, but must have been a great character to have around the place.
He was, yeah. It didn't quite work out for him like it did for Wrighty. Wrighty had a bit of an impact when he came, but it didn't really work out for Gazza. I think it was the Sheffield United game that everyone realised why he's way off the pace here. He's not the player that he used to be, but he showed magic in training. He'd done some things in training. We all looked at each other as if to say, whoa, wow. You know, for me, again, Tottenham player, legend, one of the best English players for many, many years. But it was a shame that he was going through his issues. He was going through a lot of off the field problems, drinking. But he was up to pranks. You know, we pranked him. He pranked us back. All that stuff was going on. But there was so many sad bits as well. There was games like Portsmouth away. He was in the room next to me. My job was to get him on the coach at 1:30, knocking on his door and looking at the minibar and it's empty. Little things like that, you just think, oh, it's sad. It really is, because he's an absolute living legend, and we just didn't get to see the best of him. But you know, it's a real shame from that point of view, because everywhere we went, crikey, the crowds that followed him, even just for little old Burnley back then, it was amazing.
Yeah, and with Ian Wright, there was some little piece, I think it was on Football Focus or something. He seems quite proud of his of what happened. You know, it kind of takes its place in his own history book, doesn't it? He seemed to enjoy his time at Burnley. Did you enjoy him being there with you?
Yeah, that's because he was a completely different character to Gazza. Gazza was there going through the motions, and that was it. Whereas Wrighty, again, he knew Stan. He was there because Mitchell Thomas is his best mate in football. He was there, and he just loved coming up. I think at the time he was doing some sort of TV work regularly, so we never saw him in the start of the week. He turned up like Thursday, Friday, and play Saturday. But when he walks into the dressing room, he walks in like, here I am, I'm here. But you could think, well, crikey, he's arrogant. He's not, but he's so nice and funny, and he starts giggling. You've seen him on TV with that laugh that he has, and he's so infectious, and he has everybody in stitches. He trains like it's his last time he's ever going to be on a football pitch. The enthusiasm, and he was just brilliant. He was so good on and off the pitch. He was turning up in different cars each week, Harley Davidson bikes. He was just brilliant. It was just such a laugh. And I got to see him a fair bit because he lived with Glenn Little for a little bit, and Mitchell Thomas in the house. It was a madhouse. But yeah, it was good times with Wrighty. But Wrighty loved being there. Wrighty liked how it all worked with Stan, how Stan treated him. He was a success. There was goals that were really, really important that he scored or he set up. So I think that's probably a big part of why Wrighty loved it up here as well.
But he whacked a few quid on the gate receipts as well, didn't he, Paul? There was a good turnout when he turned up.
Yeah, that was the big thing, wasn't it? Sold loads of shirts and did everything, and it was good from our point of view because it just took the pressure off everybody else. You know, wherever we went, they followed Wrighty, and everyone else could just sneak off and just go unknown. And it was good. It was just, go on, you crack on over there with him. He loved it, and we loved him. It was brilliant.
And a couple of guys you've mentioned there is Lenny John Rose, who's going through a pretty tough time at the moment with motor neurons disease, and Gary Parkinson, who had this horrific occurrence that's left him with locked-in syndrome. And this was the purpose of the book. Paul, just tell us about how the book came about.
Well, I've known Dave Thomas for many, many years, and he's talked to me for quite a while about doing a book. My initial reaction was, well, I don't think anyone will really want to read it or do anything. So I kind of put him off for quite a while, and I used to bump into him every year on holiday. And he just said, look, I really want to do one on the 90s Burnley. You were there for a majority of the 90s. Let's do it. Let's get on with it. And I thought, come on, let's do it. I've got some really good stories now. I've been picking Glenn Little's brains because he remembers absolutely everything. And I thought, why not? Why not? If we sell only a few, it doesn't really matter. But I thought, if I'm going to do it, let's do it for a purpose. And Parky's been going through this for 11 years now. It's very, very hard for him and his family. They're getting to that point now, for example, where they need a new car to be able to transport Gary around. So I thought, I'm going to set myself a target. I'm going to try and sell as many of these books as possible, because ideally I want people to buy them off me. You buy them off Amazon, Gary gets 50p. Whereas if you buy them off me, I buy the book for £10, and anything above that goes to Gary, you see. So I'm going to try and set this, I set this target of £50,000 to try and help Gary. We're going to do some sponsored events next year. I'm roping in your Jamie Hoyland, all ex-players. They're all going to come and help me out, and we're going to try and do our best for them. It's just different with Lenny, because Lenny's obviously trying to raise money by doing the Ice Foot Challenge as well for MND, and we're trying to do our bit for that. But with Parky, it's just a little bit of a different sort of story, and they're both heartbreaking stories. Two former players, two great players, two legends having to go through what they are.
It is. It's really upsetting to see it. And is the book doing all right? Are you selling a few copies? I'm sure you are.
Yeah, it's going okay. Yeah, the club shop have got some in there now. Amazon are doing their little bit, like I say. I'm getting a lot of people to try and buy off me, like I keep saying, because some people are coming in and buying them for 11 or 12 quid, and so 1 or 2 quid goes to Parky. Some people are coming to my work and giving me 30 and 40 pound. It's brilliant. It's so good. So every penny helps. I'm just going to keep pushing it as much as I can to try and raise as much as we can for Parky.
Yeah, and that making a book, writing a book, was that? Did you enjoy that experience? Did you find it worth?
I did and I didn't, in the sense that my memory is really, really bad, and I mean really bad. And there was so many times I met Dave every week. We'd go and meet for breakfast, and we'd have to go bit by bit going through it all. And I was constantly having to ring Andy Cook, Glenn Little, Jamie Hoyle, so many different people to say, right, I want to talk about this, but what happened? And Glenn's one of these that will say, oh, well, in the 56th minute, you and me done a 1-2, and then we done it. And he remembers it all. Unbelievable. So, yeah, I had to do a lot of digging. I had to kick a few people just to say, come on, help me with this. But again, a couple of people have read this and they said, oh, you've not mentioned this, you've not mentioned that, you've not mentioned that. And I'm like, oh my God. And you just forget so much, because when you think about it, 12 and a half years at Turf Moor, there's a lot of stories in there. And 6 of them with Stan Ternent. Wow, you could write quite a few books, trust me. And yeah, some of them I had to leave out, but there's some good stories in there.
And just quickly, Paul, you obviously retired. Was the transition from playing to retiring difficult? You went to Rochdale, but that never really happened, did it? And did you know then that the game was up almost?
Yeah, I kind of stitched myself up a little bit with the finishing at Burnley. I've spoke about it a few times. I didn't do myself any favours when I left Burnley, in the sense that if I'd have had an agent, I never had an agent. If I'd have had an agent, I'd have done all right for myself. Because in January of my last year, Stan sat me down and said, we're going to give you a new contract next year, but it's reduced terms because of the financial way of the club. And I was like, right. He said, but you'd be mad to sign it now, because what you'll lose between now and the end of the season just wouldn't be worth it. So I said, well, we'll wait till later on. I said, but my knee's goosed. I need a knee operation. He said, well, look, just get through it for me. He said, don't train that much during the week, play games. So we get to the end of the season, a few weeks before Stan leaves, I'm out of contract, my knee's goosed. I've not helped myself out at all. An agent would have said, sign your contract or get your knee done. Simple as that. So I then gets my knee done after my wedding. And I've got nowhere to do rehab. I'm just not fit for purpose. So stitched myself up, really, trying to get fit at places like Rochdale, not the best idea in the world. And I just thought, why am I doing this? You know, I'm on my 4th knee operation. My bowels have been battered. My body's getting to a stage where, do I really need to do this? Because the wages at Rochdale were never going to be brilliant. So it was time to call it a day and get myself a new career.
Yeah, and you're selling some nice cars at the moment.
Yeah, that came around after an experience of working within football. I'd done a little bit of Burnley. I was in the Centre of Excellence and working in the community, but I got the opportunity to go to Bury, ran their community, ran their academy, and then there was a takeover there, and the clowns came in to take over, and I can't work with clowns. I'm afraid, people that haven't got a clue, and hence why Bury are in that situation they are now. It's such a sad thing to see, because there's so many good people at Bury. But you see what goes on behind the scenes of football clubs, and they run it on the back of a fag packet. It's frightening, really. So yeah, that scarred me a little bit. That was the time to try and do something different. I just thought I can't continue down this sort of route. So the opportunity came up to, sell some cars. So yeah, it's slightly different to being on a football pitch, but it's paying the mortgage and the bills. That's the main thing.
You enjoy it?
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah, thoroughly. Because it's me and Gary, there's two of us. We own the business, and he likes the sales side of it predominantly, and I like doing all the buying on the auctions and advertising and social media side of it. So I enjoy it. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah. And just finally, Paul, a word on Burnley at the minute. It's these are halcyon times for Burnley, aren't they? And just being in the Premiership, I think, but some fans get a bit carried away. But we're doing all right, aren't we, as a club?
Doing very well, very, very well. People do get carried away when you win games at Anfield, and all of a sudden the expectation level goes up, and you want more and you want more. But that's understandable. That's at every club. But when you actually sit back and take stock of what Burnley have done, how they've achieved these things, on the budgets that they have, the crowds that they have, they do an unbelievable job. Sean Dyche is a magician. And those players, they will have many games where you think, oh, they're not quite right, it's not working for them, but they'll just bounce back. And that's what they do well. They can go to the Etihad, lose 5-0, and then they go on an unbeaten run for 10 games.
Yeah.
They're so resilient. They're so good at that. They work their socks off. Every time they put a claret and blue shirt on, they work their socks off. And that's what Burnley fans love about this squad, I think. I think just the intriguing bit now is the takeover. What's the new chairman now going to do? Because, they're borrowing money against it. What's the future going to look like? And hopefully if they back Sean, then next season can be just as good.
Yeah. And I enjoy listening to you on the radio. Your punditry is good, and you don't always give Sean an easy ride, which is right and proper. But just somebody you mentioned before talked to Lou Macari, and he said that the biggest signing at Turf Moor will always be Sean Dyche. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. If he goes, then it could be big trouble. He's a massive part of the football club. He's got a squad that respects him. And he knows how they function, and he just works for Burnley. I'm not sure Sean Dyche's brand would work at many other clubs. You see, it just works with what he's got now, and I think Lou Macari is absolutely spot on. But I do think he's, I gave him a little bit of stick last night on the radio against Liverpool. Sometimes the substitutions for me are just far too late. But he's not perfect. None of us are perfect. But what he's doing, you have to respect, you have to admire, and you hope and pray, because his contract, there's not long left, they do sign him up again.
Did you ever play against him, Paul? You were similar.
I made my league debut against him. Yeah, he's a centre half, but he played left back against me. Yeah, he never played left back again. I terrorised him. I keep winding him up every time I see him. I said, "You were just a big lug at left back." I said, "That's no good for you." He said, "Tell me about it."
Fantastic, Paul. It's been brilliant just having a bit of your time going down memory lane, and I'm sure Burnley fans will enjoy your recollections, and we're really pleased that you're doing well, and we're really, all Burnley fans are desperately sorry about Parky and Lenny. It's terrible, but if you do get a chance, pass on our best wishes, and keep on flogging that book, mate, and I'll try and get one off you myself sometime. But just give it a quick plug before we go, Paul. Where did they get it from you?
Well, ideally, if they could just contact me on any social media platform, just message me, and I can post it out, or they can come and meet me in Colne or something like that. But if they can buy it off me, then more money for Parky.
Wonderful. Paul, thanks so much for your time, and thanks for coming on the Godcast. Anybody who wants to catch any more sporting interviews, there's loads of Burnley players on there, and some other superstars as well. So just go and Google the Godcast. But for now, Paul Weller, thanks for coming on the Godcast. Cheers, buddy.
Cheers. Thank you.